Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice. Welcome to today's episode on healing with contemplative medicine. A warm welcome to all of you. Today, we are so honored to have special guest Sensei Koshin Paley Ellison, who is co-founder, president, and guiding teacher of the New York Zen Center, which is an educational nonprofit dedicated to integrating contemplative approaches to care with contemporary medicine. Through Koshin's leadership and vision, New York Zen Center has developed transformative training experiences like the Foundations in Contemplative Care and the Contemplative Medicine Fellowship that many of our colleagues have participated in. He is a renowned thought leader in contemplative care, and his work has been featured in multiple media outlets, including the New York Times, PBS, and CBS, amongst many others. Koshin is also the author of Untangled, Walking the Eightfold Path to Clarity, Courage, and Compassion, as well as Wholehearted, Slow Down, Help Out, Wake Up, and the co-editor of Awake at Bedside, Contemplative Teachings on Palliative and End-of-Life Care. He also serves on the faculty of the University of Arizona Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine Fellowship, where I first met him now years ago during one of our residential fellowship retreats, which was on Zoom because it was actually during the pandemic. So warm welcome to you, Koshin. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It is a joy to be here. Thank you so much.
There is so much we could talk about, but before we delve in, would you be willing to guide our listeners in a brief settling practice to arrive for this podcast?
Yeah, so for me, it's always a joy to take this time, the time that we have to learn how to arrive and practice arriving. And so the way I like to do that, I just invite you, whether you might be walking and you might be sitting somewhere, you might be in a car or wherever you are, but find your ground, whatever that is. Maybe it's if you're walking, it's how your feet are meeting the ground, or if you're in a car, the way you are, or if you're sitting at home or at work or in the grocery store, standing in line, how do you ground yourself? Connect. And allowing yourself to feel a bit soft in your lower belly, allowing your breath to focus in your lower belly. Maybe putting one hand there just so that you can have contact with that place just below your belly button. And just notice what that feels like. And then taking a moment to see if you can open your shoulders even like a millimeter. See a teeny tiny bit. Like, what does that do to your body and mind? And allowing yourself to elongate your spine so that you can also remember, what does it mean to be upright for you in your life? not only in your body, but also in your mind. How often we forget. Our words and thoughts are not matching our values. So how do you realign in this moment? Begin again. Thank you.
I
Thank
love
you so
the
much, Koshin.
invitation of beginning again. That's what we're about to do. And it's come up many times in this podcast. So we will begin again right here.
I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about your origin story, about where and who you were and where and who you are now, from amongst the many accolades that I've read about and know about, from Jungian psychologist to renowned contemplative thought leader and co-founder of the New York Zen Center. What's this journey been like?
So interesting, you know, always it feels so embarrassing often to hear those bios. Like, yes, and it doesn't feel like it quite describes who I am. There are definitely things I've done, you know, and I just wonder sometimes if we could write different kind of bios about just like what kind of person are you? So I would say my origin is, you know, maybe early in my life, I was surrounded by pretty amazing people who had really incredible social justice values. I come from a family who were deeply impacted and torn apart by pogroms in Eastern Europe and by the Holocaust. And so it is common that there's a lot of unprocessed trauma and also combined with great resilience, you know, with people who survived, you know, horrors of things and were forced to become refugees. And which, you know, as we live in a world, this is just a continual contemporary issue, right? And so I was, as is common in those kind of households, while we were, you know, quite educated and quite, but there was just a big disconnect between people's values and what they stood for in the world and how they treated one another and themselves. And so I grew up with that feeling and deep awareness of the painful impact of when people say one thing and do another, and how not nourishing that is. You know, really good, well-meaning people, and yet allowing or creating great harm is very humbling. And so I think that at a certain point in my life, you know, I met a teacher who was incredibly important to me, and named Sensei White, who was my karate teacher when I was 11 years old. And I was really looking for a teacher, like an Obi-Wan-Kenobi person or a Mr. Miyagi person. And I found one, which is an amazing thing. And he was a Zen guy. So it was in the basement of the local drugstore strip mall. And like pretty dingy, grungy place. And he used to have us sit in seiza, which is like your knees underneath yourself, and on a hardwood floor, you know, not in the kind of bougie, nice meditation studio that we're kind of used to now. It was, you know, pretty hardcore, you know, on a hardwood floor, and which is, turns out, is extremely painful. And he would do this and like walk around us very steadily and say that you will never be free until you can be still with your pain. And it was so powerful because I remember feeling like all I wanted to do was run. all I wanted to do was scream. All I wanted to do was anything but what was happening. Mm-hmm. And yet learning how to sweat, literally, and stay with it. And I felt like I was learning a superpower. Because I realized that many of the people in my life who I loved, I actually think it was the beginning of how I understand compassion. Mm-hmm. That they don't know how to be still with their pain. Mm-hmm. That's really powerful. And because we're not taught this. We're not taught how to do that. We're taught to distract yourself or take a medication or, but there's actually training that we can do, which I felt like I was led in on a big secret. And so I would say maybe, if you say my origin story is that I know suffering really well, immense amount of physical and sexual and verbal abuse that I endured and experienced. And I also experienced the end of that. I experienced that there is another way to do it. And there's a lineage and lineages of people who have been passing this down for, at least in my Buddhist tradition, for 2,600 years, one warm hand to another warm hand, by person to person. And so I feel that entering that world of lineage and Zen Buddhism and through discipline, really, which actually I wrestled with for many years, especially as a teenager and early 20s, like feeling very rebellious. And, it's like, I'm not going to discipline is like, it's like, some idea of institution or something like that. It's bad. But the amazing thing is I found myself really flourishing in discipline and learning the discipline of how to create the conditions. Oh, there's this amazing Zen teacher. She's often referred to as a national treasure in Japan. Her name is Shindo Oyama Roshi, and she's just like this incredible teacher and so awesome. And she says, what we can do is actually foster the conditions that actually support our flourishing, support what actually is nourishing. We can't control the outcome, as we all know, even though we may really want to. Yeah. But so I feel like in many ways, my origin story is so related to those things, and really being someone who was always drawn to specific teachers. Mm-hmm. Like I studied a lot in my life. And for many years, I studied with a man named James Hillman, and he was the one who got me interested in doing Jungian analytic training. And I went there because he said, you should study with this woman, Beverly Zabriskie. And I was like, yes. And so I've always really flourished under mentorship. Mm-hmm. With really awesome people. And so maybe part of my origin story is like, I've been someone who's really sought out teachers. And, I got my MFA because I read this book of poetry by this incredible woman. I didn't even know who she was, named Marie Howe. And I thought, well, whoever this person is, I want to spend a lot of time with them. And so I found out she was teaching at Sarah Lawrence College. And I was like, okay, I'll go to school there, and that my propensity has been to be alongside amazing teachers, inspired teachers. And because for me, there's that warm hand to warm hand teaching that has been so important and so enlivening in my life, where people are working with their values and their amazingness of going deep inside of a tradition whether it's poetry or Jung, or one of my early teachers was a man named Allen Ginsberg, who was this incredible poet and human. And I remember telling me once at a party, and he was saying, the main thing is that you have to go really deep in at least two things, otherwise you become rather boring. So the joy also of going really deep in different things is a deep joy. And maybe the other thing about who I am or origin story is that I have an amazing grandmother who named Mimi, and she was just she was like 4'10", this teeny tiny Hungarian immigrant lady. And she was the kind of person who was nowhere else. Like when you were with her, she was like right there with you. She was not distracted, and she would remember everything about you. She was not like caught up in herself, and yet really there. Like she had a sense of gravity inside of herself, but the gravity felt also towards and around. And so I just learned so much about what it means to love from her. Mm-hmm. That love is presence and attention. And in a way, you could say she was quite disciplined, which is interesting because she had a discipline of care and love. And she was the one who told Chodo and I when she was dying, she's like, I never thought I'd say this, but there's something to the Zens. And you too should start some sort of nonprofit to take care of people and teach them how to care for people without fear of themselves or others. And the Zens. She loved it. She always said the Zens. And so we did. We just thought, like, that's a really good idea.
It was a really good idea.
Yes. And so, like, the real founder of the New York Zen Center is really Mimi Schwartz, so Grandma Mimi, who, like, it's just so beautiful. So I feel like I'm maybe the truest bio is I'm the beneficiary of many wonderful, loving, deep teachers. And I feel like in some ways that would be a better bio, and a better origin, because I think that also I've been someone who constantly is looking for learning. I just feel deeply curious in general. And so every day learning something is so awesome.
I love that. I'm curious, you mentioned this idea of mentors and teachers, and I think for so many of us in medicine, people are searching for mentors and teachers who align with their humanness and their insides and how they really feel. And do you have thoughts or suggestions? Some of the things I heard in your story is you allowed yourself to just follow your gut and what was of interest, or you gave yourself permission. And those are two things that I think maybe get in our way. But I'm curious if you have tips for others who are really looking for aligned mentorship, or those, as you mentioned, a deep loving teacher. I believe they're out there, and yet something in the structure of medicine makes it hard for us to find that.
Yeah. Well, I would say don't wait too long. Mm-hmm. Because as we all know, our lives are short. And, even if we live, quote unquote, a long time, it's still pretty short in the span of things. And yet the opportunity is so amazing to be with awesome people. And I feel that, that study that came out last year, that 35% of Americans experience themselves as lonely most of the time. 35%. like more than a third of people, right? And that includes people who are married, which I felt was incredible because it actually can feel much lonelier being in a marriage and a family where you don't connect.
And
There's that, and then there's also the stat that we all know that that most doctors are considering leaving the profession now, right? And we're considering like this, it's so broken and we feel broken. So there's all of that. And then there's also, how do we really address this huge gap of connection?
Mhm.
Like, how do we actually create connection? To me, as the great Albert Einstein said, our work is to create wider and wider circles of compassion.
Mhm.
And I think that we've become kind of obsessed with like a little like paste it solution of kind of self-care or self-compassion. And what I feel super strongly about is that we need to take the word self out of that.
Mhm.
And how do I create a world now where I feel more care and compassion, both going out and coming in? And so we need circles of care. And so one of the ways that, of course, that Chodo, my husband, and I, we created this Contemplative Medicine Fellowship for the same reason, actually, from teaching in several other fellowships, like how we met. And often hearing that, what people don't feel is that they're not feeling like have an integrated life. They feel like they're also struggling with their work-life balance. There's so much bifurcation and binary identity, and even the solutions are binary, like self-care to me is like it's a binary. But human beings, we are not binary. Our experience, how we live, is not binary. We're a spectrum all the time. And so really reflecting on what is the solution? What are the solutions? How do I actually integrate? How do I actually engage in a new way? So my recommendation always is find your people. And how do you have a dedicated group? In the Buddhist school, they call it Sangha, and Shakyamuni Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, whether you're Buddhist or not, it's super smart. He said the whole of the life is having good spiritual friends, like friends who are interested in not just your professional bio, to stay with that theme, right? But who's interested in how you feel inside of yourself? Who are those people? So I think that, as I was saying, that we created this fellowship because we felt like that part of the medicine, and whether you do the fellowship or not, like that, how do you find your people, and how do we redefine these words in medicine, like fellowship, which has become like a tick box for subspecialty? And how can it actually be part of the true medicine? And how do we even reclaim words like medicine? Like, what actually is good medicine for me? What kind of medicine do I need in my life? And this is what I've dedicated my life to. But maybe we often don't think about, are we treating ourselves with that kind of respect and dignity, and reflecting on these words that we live our lives by, but often lose track? It's like that's so just the way it is. Like, we have a New York Zen Center, and the shadow of that would, of course, always be that we're not being very Zen or not really very centered, right? So the same, I think, is true as physicians, that the shadow is that we're not really thinking about what medicine is and what is the kind of medicine I need so that we can live one life, one full life, where our intrapersonal, interpersonal, and clinical work is one. And that we're just thinking about balance and equanimity rather than, what do I have to do? But to me, what I would invite all of us to think about is like, who are my people? And maybe I don't have them, but how do I actually put that into a priority? To me, it's an urgent priority for all of us to have very strong relationships where the people are like, I got you. And we're inspired and we can be disappointed and celebrate together and be joyful together. That's what we've actually seen in our fellowship program, that the circles continue. They meet, they're firing up their WhatsApp group, and they meet every month, as a group. And now the cohorts are meeting together, and that's just one way, right? So that's not the way, but it's a way. And to me, it's a beautiful model. I mean, the world needs so much nurturing, and each of us deserves so much nurturing. So how do you make sure you're putting that as a priority, but not as a task, but actually as how do you want to live? Because we don't have an infinite amount of time. And what are you waiting for? To me, it's like, how do we just like get a little, as my grandmother would say, get a little zip in your step, like, yeah.
I love the intentionality of how do we want to live, and this idea of priorities versus tasks. In medicine, we're so checkbox oriented, and the tasks. It also struck me when you were talking about creating places to find your people. We run the Mindful Healthcare Collective. It's a very similar idea, places to find your people. And just this idea of looking around in medicine, where can we find our people? I think there are a lot of places, but we don't think about our days that way. And we don't think about that being an important way to live a life that feels more meaningful and zippy. Feeling alive. People really are the center of that. And that's not found on a checklist box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not even possible, right? Not even possible.
I'm curious also, because I don't know, and I'm thinking many of our listeners don't know, if you could explain what you mean by contemplative medicine. So there's integrative medicine, there's lifestyle medicine, there's all these different approaches, but what is that? And I've had people ask me this, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's such a great, so in my opinion.
Yeah, fair enough.
Contemplative medicine is actually the medicine where you're actually thinking about, you're contemplating what actually is medicine. What is good medicine? And that contemplation is the heart of it, that to really consider the limited view that we mostly have turned to. And I think that we're all like, my hunch is like everyone listening, and all three of us are like, we're already like, yes. And so it's not a lifestyle. And so some people ask me that, like, oh, is this lifestyle medicine? It's like, no, this is actually how you want to be in your life. It's actually, to me, it's like a redefining of the ground, where you're really considering the three aspects that we focus on, and at least on our curriculum, which is equally, is intrapersonal focus, interpersonal focus. And so the clinical work for us is the last third of our training. And to me, that is also, you could say that to me is what contemplative medicine is, because we're realizing that we are the vehicle. We are what we're working with. So if we're not really tending to what's going on inside of myself, am I feeling supported? Am I making, choices that are nourishing for me? And then really thinking about my interpersonal relationships, friendships. And that's what we're talking about. Like, not even at the clinic or in your office or hospital. We're talking about, like, who are your folks that you're like shooting like with, and who are you relying on? And how are you nourishing those relationships? So I would say that, contemplative medicine is really like the refocus of who you are in your life. What is the medicine you actually need? And how is it like an active contemplation that it's not enough to just put band-aids on things? It's not about a weekend retreat or getting a mani-pedi, although those things are great. Fantastic things, but like, it's about how do you want to experience yourself in a 360 way in this short life of ours? And so it's that contemplation, like, and seeing our lives as one life. And I think that we get that, it's not, I have a friend named Megan Devine. She was talking about, like, I'm not really a bumper sticker kind of person. So I don't think it's a kind of a bumper sticker thing, but I think that all of us in some ways know that an easy way is not, people say, oh, just tell me what to do. Well, that doesn't tend to be the long term. Over time, things that are hard won tend to be more helpful. Things that we actually put the effort in, the discipline for. Even loving, to me is, I've been in a marriage for almost 24 years, so amazing, and the person I married is not here anymore. He has evolved, and that itself is a discipline, to like keep seeing, because it's so easy to kind of glaze over, as we all know. I mean, no one has to practice glazing over.
And as you mentioned, it's ongoing, right? That's why it's a discipline. It's not a one and done. You don't do a weekend, you don't do a fellowship even. You carry all of that forth, and it's, the word that comes to mind is a practice, whether it's a practice or a discipline. To me, they're much one and the same.
Koshin, I have a question about, with contemplative medicine's emphasis on both interrelational but also inner relational approaches. And as you're well aware of contemporary medicine's time scarcity and the pressures of practicing in medicine, how can we as healers embody a contemplative care approach when we're facing these very real time pressures in medicine?
Oh, yeah. And the good old electronic record, And the reality is, what we do in 3 minutes completely matters is how we are in the 3 minutes. And as we know, like, the average doctor's visit still is 3 minutes, which seems insane. And which is important. It's the average. So half of them are shorter than that. And so the time pressure is real. But in what I've learned so much from our fellows is that actually, if you are really nourished in your life, at home, friends, family, or loved ones, whatever, because families are all very different. what we've learned from them is that there is so much more joy. So that when you go in, you're feeling, as that some of these lingo words, like we feel resourced, you feel full, you feel nourished. So that when you're like, yeah, we got a guy like, but you can be like, what you can do in 3 minutes is amazing if you're feeling nourished. And taking the time and creating ritual around even the electronic record is possible. So it just like, if you realize like, oh, this is my life too. If we see everything as tasks, our life is much smaller. But as we see each thing as an opportunity to care, to practice compassion, both for ourselves and others equally, it is new things are possible. And I've learned that not just because I say so, but from our fellows. And actually, most of them, we just had this research study come out. One of the things that, yes, there's less burnout. People felt not burnt out anymore. But what I was most interested in, they felt joy. And so I feel that joy is such an interesting thing, I think often misunderstood, because one of the things that we teach is that there's the joy that you can feel your full experience. It's not joy like, yay! Although that's can be part of it, but joy from a Buddhist perspective is like that you can feel the whole range of the verticality and the horizontal nature of reality. That you can like, wow, I can feel really tired, and let me see if I can find the place that's not tired, or maybe I just need a minute. And so that you can meet it, our life, our reality, in a totally different way. But we can't if we're not really focusing on what the ground is.
What I hear you offering is focusing on what's in our control, which is us, what's within us in the midst of the chaos that medicine is. We still can nourish ourselves. We still can choose how we show up and how we take care of ourselves, and the story we tell about all the boxes, which we often say in this podcast, right? Medicine needs to be fixed. We all know that. But what's here for us now is how we choose to show up for it and what decisions we make, and taking agency for who we each are. And I think there are tools that allow us to do that. And that's, and fellowship is clearly part of that. And relations are clearly part of it. So I also love this idea of it's not a checkbox and it's not self-care. It's really 360 nourishment and thought about how we can do this. Everyone I know went into medicine because we love it, and we've sacrificed so much to do it. And so being frustrated by the system and is okay, but it's not helping us. And so it's sort of, how can we nourish ourselves to literally be part of the change of the system and to do what we love in the midst of it.
My God. So yes. And it's like also like I just love all the things you're saying, and that medicine is, there's a problem because it's also, we've forgotten again like what medicine actually the word means. Like it's kind of become into an object when it's actually, there's this beautiful old Hindu stories where that Hanuman goes and like to get some medicine, and he brings the whole mountain, and it's like the whole mountain is medicine. And there's Zen stories where it says, the whole earth is medicine. And it depends on what you call medicine. And I think that I just want to always keep encouraging us to like widening out into like, and we need each other to like, because I forget too. And so I need you to remind me And so like the beauty of community is that we can remind each other we're all gonna, get stuck and fall into a rut. Entropy is a real thing. And so we have to that's why we need each other. Remind me, all right, remember what medicine is? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And I love this idea that medicine is so many things, right? It's not just what happens in the exam room, and we know that, and yet the way that artificial medicine is structured right now is you're in it or you're not in it, and you're at work or you're not, or that's the part where we've sort of lost that old vision of medicine as healing.
Yeah.
For everyone, not just those being healed, but the healers.
Totally. Totally. And I think that it's also helpful to remember that we've kind of lost our way for the last couple decades. But medicine has been around a lot longer than that. And so we just have to remember whoa, the big group, and it's why, the Shakyamuni Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, is thought of as the great physician because he gave a prescription, for suffering, for how we are not content, and that there's a way out, and so I think that we can remember that suffering itself is also what we can remember. It's not symptoms, we can get so, like we were talking about earlier about fellowships, we can get so specialized and compartmentalize our life like that and forget.
Thank you, Koshin, for helping us remember and to ask the questions of what is medicine and what do we need. And I will also make sure that we include the link to that hot off the press article in Explore that you mentioned, written by our dear friend and colleague, Dr. Ann Kennard, who's a graduate of the Contemplative Medicine Fellowship.
She's so cool.
We think so too. Is there any message that our listeners could benefit from as we wrap up with you? I feel like we could talk all day with you, and I hope that we have the opportunity to do that soon. But is there anything that you'd like to impart upon our listeners? And also, I want to mention that our Mindful Moment offering is going to be led by Koshin, so please stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for that.
Well, I want to reiterate the urgency. And Dogen Zenji, the founder of our Zen school, wrote this poem that we chant every night, and many Zen centers around the world chant. And it says, "Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunities are lost. On this night, the days of our life are decreased by one. Each of us must strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life." And so this poem for me is this invitation to giddy up, to put a little zip in it, because many of us, I love poetry so much, and it reminds me of this other poem where, Hafiz, who was this incredible Persian poet, said that, fear is the cheapest room in the house. Oh, how I wish for you to have better living conditions. And so I think the invitation to the haste for the medicine, to not wait, till it gets so festered that many of us keep forgetting that we like wait so long and let it to get so funky and bad. And that we feel like we almost like have to be on the ground moaning before we change because of our fear of change. And so how do we meet fear, and how do we realize we can have a much bigger house where fear is part of it, but it doesn't stop us? And to me, I'm saying this because I need to hear this again and again. We all need to hear this again and again. Like, fear is not, it's there, but it doesn't have to be the barrier. It has some, oftentimes in my experience, it is the gateway to go through, to open the fear and go into a new life and to not wait.
I love that. It's beautiful. And we've often talked actually about the urgency bias in people practicing in medicine. We're urgent to get stuff done and fix, and yet this is a space where maybe using that urgency for you and the urgency about taking care of yourself and the way and this practice of medicine. It feels like a beautiful place to realize that there's, different sides of all of these things, fear and urgency. And yet we often talk about our fear of change and why it gets in the way, but helping, using the fear for you and sort of opening windows. I love this very, just strikes me as this sky, very high approach that allows us this space to kind of figure out where to go in medicine, which is so compressed right now. Could we just open up the skies a little, like my sky opening up after the big storm today?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. And I think so many beautiful ideas and a really inspiring time shared. So I'm grateful. I have so many new exciting thoughts percolating, and I'm sure those listening do as well. So we'll close off our conversation here, but we invite you to stay on after the sound of the singing bowl for a beautiful, mindful moment led by our inspiring guest.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes, and please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely.
Let's take a moment to ground ourselves. However that's available to your body and mind. What would grounded be like right now? While you're walking, driving, laying down. Always a wonderful question. And in a practice that I discovered actually in writing my last book, Untangled, I found that what I thought was protecting me, I had this image of this kind of iron suit of things that protected me in my life. So just invite you to imagine if you have this kind of protection, or what do you go to for protection or control? And how do you reflect on how sometimes what the armor that we create, mine began when I was a child, can also become a cage the size of your own body and mind? And so, what would it be like to open the front of that cage, the front of your body, just for a moment? The things that you use mostly and that you're most aware of to protect yourself. What if you took a moment to just open that? What happens? And to begin to get curious about what are the sides of your cage like, your armor, and what are some of the things that are behind you, the back of your armored cage? Maybe things you're not aware of that keep you in place, maybe keep you stuck, keep you afraid, keep you overwhelmed. And just for a moment, all together, just taking one step forward out of this armor, now that the front is open, and just standing with your ground, connection to the ground, just outside your armored cage. And just notice how that changes your body and mind. Begin to imagine where are other places that you could do this. Feel a bit freer. Find others who want to open up and be with you in a new way. How do you realize that there's not another moment to actually change? Don't wait.